Well, hello and welcome to today's edition of Demystifying Microsoft. I'm thrilled to be joined today by Jeremy Santos, our Director of Engineering. How are you doing today, Jeremy?
Doing fine, thank you. How are you?
Doing good. Doing good. Enjoying a Wednesday. It's hump day on the
Yeah.
downside of the week. Today we're going to be digging into Azure Virtual Desktop. So, Jeremy, why don't we start with just what is Azure Virtual Desktop, and when did you first get introduced to Azure Virtual Desktop?
So Azure Virtual Desktop is Azure's implementation of a virtual desktop infrastructure in the cloud. I think it's a really awesome product. I got introduced to it a few years ago. Liked it immediately, saw the potential for it, and was like, wow, this is going to be an amazing product. And I think, people are going to want to have this in their environment, especially when it comes time for, hardware refreshes where you don't want to spend money on those desktops and laptops. This is a perfectly viable way to go and an awesome way to go, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a great product. I think I cut my teeth early on in my engineering career managing remote desktop servers. I think many of us did, right? Windows remote desktop services with those web gateways, and I always think of this as the baby of that, right? This is Microsoft taking that technology, migrating it to the cloud, but really solving some of the fundamental challenges with it. I think it competes directly with many of Citrix products and VMware Horizon, a few of those other products out there. But I think there's some real advantages to the Microsoft implementation of AVD. I think their solution has some really, really cool capabilities. What are some of your favorite capabilities of AVD, Jeremy?
Well, number one is the multi-session with Windows 10 and Windows 11. It's only available through Azure AVD. Before you could only get that with the server. And to me, that was the game changer right there, because most of our users are going to be Windows 11, Windows 10. And to minimize costs, you can have multiple people logged into the same machine.
Yeah, that Windows that scalability that provides, right? You can buy a pretty decent server in Azure. Well, that's an expensive cost if it's dedicated to one user. So if it was a VDI environment, a lot of times you're going to buy a much smaller VM so that you can manage costs, and you get some of that lack of scalability. Whereas with AVD, we've had people with 25, 30, 35, 40 users on a server, depending on how it's spec'd, and it performs well, and it can scale out as well, right? You can spin up 2 servers and then 3 servers, and spin them up at night, spin them down, spin them up during the day, turn them off at night. There's a lot of flexibility and scalability from a performance up capability. So yeah, that's definitely one of the big advantages of the product.
And the other thing I would say is to leverage Azure's infrastructure and their backup features and capabilities and the resilience that they offer being in the cloud. And you're not paying for any of that equipment. That's already there for you to take advantage of.
Yeah, and you actually get some cost savings too over like a traditional remote desktop server or other VDI products, because if you're running a business premium, a Microsoft 365 business premium, or E3 or E5, it includes that virtual use, that Azure hybrid use benefit license. So you can run that Windows 10 and 11. You're not paying a client access license fee. You're not paying an OS fee. It's all
Yeah.
included. So yeah, you definitely get some really, really good optimization there. I really like the security features, having run remote desktop and in, the late teens, watching customers get compromised because they had an RDP portal, right?
Mhm.
Even if it was for a long time, I remember 10, 20 years ago, we'd have all these 3389 ports open for all the different devices and a site that people were remoting into from home, right? That was a different world. And then the threat actors got smart to that. And then we put in a web gateway in front, right? Where you were only opening 443, but that web gateway is still a place they can go hammer on with brute force and try to log in and try to get around. One of the things I love about remote desktop, about Azure Virtual Desktop, is the session is initiated from the authentication flow. So you authenticate to Microsoft, then it builds the tunnel. So there's no
Yes.
open ports. Your servers aren't sitting on the internet for somebody to hack against. They're not public facing web servers or open ports. It's all kind of session based through Microsoft's infrastructure. And so you get all the advantages of no open ports and you can really apply a lot of your conditional access policies to it. So you can get really granular of, hey, for this remote desktop server, you can't get in until you'll put a FIDO key into your authenticator app on Office 365 or whatever layers you want. You can really get granular and particular about access rules.
Yeah, that was my last feature that I really liked. That security feature and that reverse tunnel, but also eliminates the need to have a dedicated VPN to be able to reach these devices securely. So I thought that was another game changer with the service that they were providing.
Absolutely. And that's true from Windows, Mac, Android, Apple, iPad, iPhone. They all have the same Windows client that you can remote in with. And you don't have to have, like you said, a VPN or be on the right network or have it. Just you authenticate in the app, and then it shows you the sessions you have access to. And I think is a really good use case is those bring your own device scenarios, right?
Oh
You've
yeah.
got, like you said, you've got some old machines, or maybe you've got contractors that you don't want to buy them a $1,800 laptop, so you give them a Azure Virtual Desktop environment. All the work they're doing is in your environment, not on their local device. So I don't care what you use it at home, your Mac, your iPad. When you do work for me, you do it in my environment, and I control all the variables. Or you've got employees or that sort of thing where you want that sort of scenario. It really gives you a lot of flexibility on how they access your systems.
Yeah, and on top of that, for the added security, with these bring your own devices, depending on, conditional access policies, Intune management, they have to meet certain specifications required by the company before they can even remote into that virtual machine. And also we can eliminate the ability to cut and paste to the local machine. So the data stays in the cloud. And when that person's done with their work, your data and all the work that's been done is safe and secure.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the other cool features Microsoft built out that is only available in Azure Virtual Desktop, this is not available in Citrix or in traditional remote desktop or any of these other products, is their Teams-enabled capabilities in AVD, where you properly configure Teams. The audio and visual is a lot of bandwidth to run through a remote server in that remote server environment. And they have a redirect built where you see it in your AVD window, but your audio and video is going directly between your client and Teams server. So you kind of eliminate that middle hop, and it can be a big advantage in this highly connected Teams-centric world to run AVD instead of other virtual desktop products.
Yeah, the optimization for Teams is key because if you're in a Microsoft environment, that's your main mode of communication. So you want that optimized. You don't want that lag on your video or your chat.
Absolutely. There's a lot of other cool, kind of more nerdy features that are fun to get into. This is the stuff you and I get excited about. A big one is FS Logics. This is a third party they bought a number of years ago and integrated into the product. But what does FS Logics give us, Jeremy?
Give us the ability to load our roaming profiles. At startup, these are profiles that, you can customize a user's environment. So whenever they log into their machine, their desktop is the same. Everything looks and acts normal like a regular desktop or laptop. There's really the user experience is the same. And so, and that can be, no matter where you log in from, that profile is loaded at startup for you. Right. So
the value of that really comes through in larger farms. You get a company that's got 250 people in AVD, they might have 15 servers they're logging into, right? You've got this bigger farm. If you have to, every time you log in, Outlook's got to re-download your profile, and it's got to rebuild your index for your searching, your Copilot index, all these things that happen locally. FS Logics just takes that away, and it doesn't matter which one of the 15 servers you log into. You're instantly in the same profile with everything prepped. And it's a real big deal in those larger environments. And I think really helps with scalability, but also even just, even with remote desktop, there was sometimes a feeling of like you had to make sure you properly configured every server exactly the same. I feel like FS Logics takes away some of that pressure because it kind of automates a lot of that.
What are some of the other features that you like besides FS Logic?
The ability to use GPU-enabled VMs is pretty powerful. So if you've got a reason, you're doing maybe some CAD work, or maybe you're doing some local large language model work, or you've got a reason you need some extra performance, the flexibility that Azure Virtual Desktop gives you is incredible because you can spin up a proof of concept environment, spin up one server, put it on way stronger hardware. Maybe you got an engineering team that needs those GPUs and they're really heavy duty. You can split your farm into two sets of servers. You got some real cost efficient servers for your knowledge workers and some high end GPU backed machines for your engineers. That flexibility to test and try and use and leverage larger and different hardware is a real game changer. It's a matter of a couple clicks and you've got that change. It reboots the server and before you know it, you're on new hardware. Real powerful tool for testing things.
One of the things that I thought was really great that they included in their service offering was the ability to spin up validation environments so that you can test code changes, different releases before you actually release them to production and see how things are affected. A lot of times that's not well thought out and you have to manually build out those environments. But AVD builds it as part of the service offering where you can just deploy that validation environment, do your testing, and then, hey, we're good to go for production.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think the ability to scale worldwide is another thing that AVD brings, whether that's backup and disaster recovery, where you can have your farm split between the East Coast and the West Coast, or you can have a bunch of servers replicated and have an offsite that's a cold site that's a hot site that you can hit a button and it spins up. Being able to leverage the Microsoft networking is super valuable. So whether that's a private endpoint where you can have some Azure resources that are not exposed to the internet, but you can give AVD access into that environment, using ExpressRoute into your data center. If you've got a lot of data center centric data, you can have that higher capacity connection, that lower latency connection from AVD to your data center. And there's also ways to even configure it with on-ramps, local on-ramps. So let's say you got a team in the Philippines and a team in the US. It can be really valuable for those scenarios, because if you've ever worked with companies, especially in the APAC region, performance of the network between the US and the APAC can be really a challenge. You can have some really low latency, because you're cutting across the Pacific Ocean and then down. But to get to Australia, it's a long ways. It's physically a long ways, a lot of hops. And one of the things you get with the Microsoft environment in Azure is you build your servers in the right place and you build your infrastructure right. You're not running over the public internet between there and here. You're running on Microsoft's backbone, and often Microsoft's backbone has much better performance than the public internet does. And it can be really valuable for those international teams that are working across time zones, across continents, to get an on-ramp into Azure's data center, and then everything is much faster from there.
The ability to use those private endpoints even within your own environment, so you're not exposing, like, let's say you need to connect to Azure storage, and you want to just isolate it to your virtual network. You can do that by virtue of the private endpoints. I think another key feature that I liked is their integration with Traffic Manager and Azure Front Door to give you the shortest route to remote into your virtual machines. I'm a big fan of Traffic Manager, global DNS load balancing solution. I think it's awesome. And integrating that with Azure Front Door to make that connection. So no matter where you are in the world, when you need to connect, you're going to get that optimized path to get to your AVD virtual machine.
It's awesome. It's a huge feature. Something can be very expensive to build in your own technology, right? How are you building that? That's not an easy thing to build, and you just get it as a, simple config on the Azure side. I think the other interesting thing about AVD is AVD comes in, not to complicate it, but there's a lot of different flavors we can also sell of AVD. The core AVD product runs in Azure on a VM, and you can either have that VM have a single user in a VDI mode, or a shared host where you have multi-user. Mm-hmm. But there's a number of other ways we can leverage AVD in the cloud, or products that are based on AVD. What are some of those other products that are similar, they're related to AVD that we can leverage?
That's a good question. Other products that are you talking about Azure products or
just I was thinking products? More like Dev Test Labs or Windows 365. Like, what's the difference between AVD and Windows 365?
Well, Windows 365, I like to refer to that as kind of your vanilla operating system. Some an environment where you don't necessarily have the the resources to manage your machines, and you just need uh, a vanilla flavored Windows PC that doesn't require a lot of maintenance and it's just ready for the user to use right on startup. And the other good thing about Windows 365 is, and these are not customizable machines. You get the flavor that you choose based on your license, but your costs are fixed each month. So it's easy to estimate what you're going to be spending on each one. Or you have Azure AVD, it's a customizable solution. We're going to decide what apps are going to run on there. We're going to decide CPU count, memory, where those are fixed costs for you with the Windows 365 Cloud PC.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Windows 365 is super approachable. I mean, it can be as simple as check the box in a licensing portal and assign it to the user, and an hour later they have a VM to log into. So it's really even a simpler way to approach it for, hey, I've got a contractor I need on tomorrow. I'm going to give them a Windows 365. It's done. Simple. It's clean. But I think as you scale, it's not as cost effective at scale than Azure AVD. We can really tweak the costing. Whereas, like you said, it's one device per user on Windows 365. If you have shift workers, Windows 365 will allow you to, swap users out over a 24-hour period, but it's really meant for one user at a time.
Yes.
Dev Test Labs is a product in Azure that I know a few of my customers are using just to do testing environments for their developers. And it's built on AVD. It's a very similar product. It's built into the Microsoft development stack in Azure Dev Test. But it's very cool because you can do a similar project where I spin up a VM. I have a couple developers in there. They can test stuff. And it's kind of a sandbox for testing software. How about in compliance environments? How does GCC fit in, highly, like government environments? I mean, sorry, AVD fit in those environments?
Well, it'll meet the security requirements that is required for GCC or what's the other one? GVCC. Yeah. And so, in most government environments, especially with computers, you need to be able to use a CAT card. AVD is compliant with that. Other methods of multi-factor authentication. So AVD meets those requirements to allow those workers to meet those stringent requirements for the government environments that they're dealing with.
Yeah, I think it seems like it's a really good way to go with some of these environments as we're getting more into a world with CMMC and other federal requirements that are kind of ramping up. The government is starting to recognize the risk that the private sector has for them. The idea of an enclave is becoming a conversation that we didn't have a few years ago. And that's the idea that you build a small environment for a subset of your users for when they're doing the work that's sensitive. So the contract with the government and the data for that government contract, maybe it's 5% of your business, but it has a very long list of requirements. You could spin up an GCC High Office 365 tenant, tie it to a GCC High AVD tenant, and all of a sudden you have an environment where they have a desktop that can do Word, they can send and receive emails and do all the things they need to do in their very sensitive role for the government, involving that unclassified controlled information. But they do it in a space where you control the variables. You don't have to blow up your entire environment and build an entire environment, pay those costs, because those licenses in those environments are much more expensive especially the GCC High perspective. It gets very expensive to go down that road.
I would imagine it would be, yeah.
Yeah. So there's another product Microsoft announced in November that we're very excited about, and we'll see how much we'll get to use it. Then they announced a product called Windows 365 Link. Did you see these devices, Jeremy, when they announced them?
I did. You were the one that mentioned it to me first, and I started looking into it. So me, like you, I was very disappointed that they didn't have the AVD connectivity built into that, but I'm sure it's coming. But it's a cool little thin client that is a small form factor. And I think I think it'll really even take off more if we allow that AVD access through that client.
The idea is it's little Mac mini size, little tiny, little desktop computer. And all it is it's a remote client for AVD, for Windows 365 right now. We hope it'll support AVD as time goes on. But a couple $100, you've got a cloud managed, hardened endpoint, which is great for remote workers or contractors, or, you're in, you're in a sensitive environment, like you're in a a meat packing plant or a manufacturing facility with a lot of dust. Simple, lightweight, just thin client, but without some of the management layers. We've had thin clients for 30 years. A lot of them require a lot of management infrastructure to do it right. Keep them updated. These guys look just amazing. They're Intune managed. There's almost no software that can run on them. They support AVD and FIDO tokens and all the things we need to be secure. So really excited about that product. And I think it launches in March or April. So we're getting close to the launch, and we'll see how quickly Microsoft gives in to the pressure to have AVD support. I hope it happens fast.
Me too.
Yeah. Well, another product we've talked about a couple times on the podcast is Azure Local. And I think AVD is one of the more compelling uses of Azure Local. So Jeremy, tell us a little bit about Azure Local and how AVD fits into that equation.
Well, Azure Local allows you to extend your Azure presence locally. So you can have your hardware that maybe already exists, and you can utilize that to deploy an AVD environment that you manage locally, but you're using the same portal, the same management plane to take care of all these devices. So, you have that familiarity with the tool already through the portal to bring up your environment, and you manage all the aspects of your Azure Local environment right there through the portal. And so you have complete and granular control with your hardware, so 2, 3 nodes if you want, or a single node. And there's no cost. Well, I take that back. There is a slight cost to spin up your VMs, but again, these are not the same costs that you would have if you were spinning up that virtual machine in Azure itself.
Yeah.
So there's
absolutely.
some cost savings there.
Yeah, there's cost savings. And I think, one of the places we landed on AVD for a lot of our smaller customers was they went full cloud on their endpoints, right? They're intra-ID joined, Intune managed. Most of their apps are SaaS apps, and the majority of employees just didn't need a connection to a data center or a set of servers anywhere. They could just run their laptop in a coffee shop, and they had access to everything they needed wherever they were, as long as they had internet access. But in a lot of the small business space, you still have 1 or 2 line of business apps that are legacy. They're running on a SQL server. They need to run on a Windows server with an IIS server, and you got an app server and a database server and a file share. And there's some of these legacy constructs. And, it's really interesting. Some of these industries, there's 2 or 3 pieces of software that run that specific part of that industry. And if you're going to be in that space, you're running one of those 3, and the majority of them are very legacy software, right? They were written by companies in the space for their own use, and they sold it to other people. They're not designed from the ground up to be in the cloud. And so you have those server uses. And AVD fit a really good spot there where we could give people access to that app through AVD, whether through a remote app or through a full desktop experience. But I think this Azure Local development really opens a new door of that app may run on a local server, right? A lot of times, some of those line of business apps need a lot of horsepower for like a SQL database, and that can be very expensive to run big SQL servers in Azure. There's just a lot of cost with the cores, the memory, and the licensing. And sometimes you can buy a lot of server for 4 or 5 months of Azure usage for that SQL server buys you a very nice piece of hardware for your office.
Yes.
And so this Azure Local lets you say, great, I want that local server because that app needs to stay local. But all the benefits of Azure Virtual Desktop we talked about earlier, that security, that scalability, that brokered connection that's not just an open port, you get rid of all that complexity with AVD on Azure Local, but then your users are on a VM right next to the server. So they get that performance being on premise. So definitely a really exciting development.
Yeah, I see that a lot with like mid-sized construction companies or design companies or HVAC companies that have a specific design software working with a SQL database that they just don't have any option to move to the cloud.
Yes.
And then that stops them dead in their tracks to move to the cloud. But now with Azure Local, like what you just said, now they have the ability to have one foot in the cloud and also be local and still run their apps and services there and do all their design work that they need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's also compelling in a world where I think there's a lot of pre-COVID and early COVID hardware that was purchased hey, we got to get everything working from home. So a bunch of
Yeah.
Citrix farms were spun up and a bunch of VMware hardware was bought. And all these servers were built so people could work from home. And a lot of that hardware is coming end of life, and VMware and Citrix renewals are expensive. They're complicated. There's a lot of complexity to building out a Citrix environment properly. And I think AVD on Azure Local allows you to replace both that VMware and that Citrix stack with a simple to manage to the Azure portal environment that's scalable and cost effective, has a lot less licensing costs on it, has some very great performance. So really, I think a really compelling offer for customers looking to get that, replace a remote desktop or replace Citrix on-prem. Look at AVD on Azure Local. It's a real opportunity.
And
So
on top of that, too, the other thing is that Citrix and VMware, they come with significant administrative overhead to maintain those environments. They don't maintain themselves. And so moving to Azure Local just simplifies everything for the administrators. You're in
yes.
Azure already, you have Azure Local, it's the same management interface that you're using.
And a lot of those same automations around patching, auto patch, all the security features that Microsoft's built into the platform, it's ubiquitous and runs the same in local as it does in the cloud. It's beautiful. So, Jeremy, why is Big Green IT and the SourcePath Center of Excellence the place you should go for your AVD help? What do we know about AVD?
Well, we have our certification in an AVD Advanced Specialization. Our engineers I consider them subject matter experts with Azure Virtual Desktop. Not only can they deploy it through the portal, but we have very complicated scripting that can deploy just about any environment that you want, whether it's just a few AVD machines or several hundred, and all the other parts and pieces that go along with it, FS Logics, your workspaces, your application groups. We have the expertise to deploy those quickly and efficiently. And our scripting allows for, if you have a customer service environment that you need to build out in several locations, we can script that out so that the environment is the same each place. There's no deviation with the script. So we have the people in place that can definitely deploy your AVD services in a manner that's efficient and concise each and every time.
Awesome. Yeah, that advanced specialization is not easy to get from Microsoft. You got to qualify with certifications and experience and proven implementations. And then Microsoft audited us to make sure that we're doing it consistently, that we have a process, that process is repeatable, it follows their best practices. So that AVD advanced specialization is a real star in our cap that we really worked hard to get to, and I think it means a lot. Really speaks to the experience we have on this topic. Tell me what it's like if I want to try a proof of concept of AVD. I'm not sure I want to migrate my environment there, but hey, I want to test it out. What's a proof of concept look like?
Well, we can deploy your proof of concept for you, and we can have it to be any size that you need for whatever your business requirements are. So you give us the specs like, hey, we have X number of users. This is the type of machine and work that we're doing. We spec it all out for you. We deploy it for you. Once it's ready, we hand it over to you, show you how to use it, show you the ins and outs. And if, once you're done with it, it's a quick tear down as well. So you're not assuming cost for the long run until you're ready to pull the trigger. So that proof of concept environment, you can have it up as long or as short as you want. You just let us know. And if you need help tearing it down, we can tear it down for you as well. But, whatever your needs are, we'll spec it out, make sure that you have a viable environment, and then, off to the races you go. You have your own little sandbox for AVD to play with.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, I think AVD will be a popular tool this year as well as Windows 10. It's end of life, as we know. In October, a lot of those Windows 10 machines all the Windows 10 machines need to be on Windows 11 by mid-October, or they will no longer receive Microsoft patches. But there is a scenario where you may not be able to get hardware quick enough or can't get your fleet converted quick enough. You could run some of those people through an AVD session, get them on Windows 11, and really reduce that risk from those out-of-date machines in that environment. Might be worth looking at if you're struggling to get hardware replaced. So lots of use cases, line of business apps, remote access from international places, scalability, work from home scenarios, bring your own device, contractors. So I love this product because it's so flexible. We can throw it into so many different scenarios. Yeah, as you get interested in, if you are interested in learning more about AVD and how we deploy it, feel free to reach out to our team. We have a contact us section on our website, biggreenit.com. Go ahead and just submit a contact us form, and we'd love to reach out to you and just have a conversation about what you're seeing. If you're an existing customer, you also can reach our support team at support@biggreenit.com. We're pretty excited. We are going to be rebranding in the next couple months to the SourcePass Microsoft Center of Excellence. So we're excited about that. So stay tuned for more announcements around that. And Jeremy, thank you for joining me today. It was a lot of fun to dig into this, and this is an area you have a lot of experience in. So thanks for being the smart guy on the call today. So,
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
well, thank you for joining us today on the Demystifying Microsoft podcast. We hope you enjoyed the video, and we look forward to talking to you soon. Some upcoming topics include EA renewals. We're talking about how that's changing. We'll be doing some content around Copilot, and we also have a monthly podcast from our buddy Wade, where he's talking about what's new in Microsoft, what's new in the licensing, and just the way Microsoft's doing business. It's worth checking that out. Big shout out to Wade. He does a great job with that. So
Yes,
keep an eye on our YouTube channel and our LinkedIn channels, and like, share, subscribe, do all the things. And we appreciate your time today.
Yes, thank you very much.
All right. Okay.
Take care.